Sunday, July the 25th, 1784. I am returned from church, the happy wife of my faithful Bozzy. Through the spiteful animosity that agitated London when it became known that we would marry, his nerves, like mine, have been horribly shaken. But he lives, he loves me, and will be mine forever. May God give us a long life together.
London, Tuesday, December the 14th, 1784. This morning, two friends called upon Dr. Johnson to learn how he was. What they found was the most awful sight of Dr. Johnson laid out in his bed without life. When I received this intelligence, my feeling was just one large expanse of stupor. I could not believe it.
Milan, Sunday, January the 2nd, 1785. Oh, poor Dr. Johnson.
He has made a chasm which nothing can fill up. There is nobody, no man can be said to put you in mind of Dr. Johnson.
Tuesday, January the 25th, 1785. I have recovered myself sufficiently to think what will be the consequence to me of Johnson's death. 6 people have already undertaken to write his life, I hear. My husband would have me add to the number.
To write the life of him who excelled all mankind in writing the lives of others is an arduous and presumptuous task. As I had the honour and happiness of enjoying his friendship for upward of 20 years, I flatter myself that few biographers have had more advantages.
Sitting steadily down at the other end of the room, to write at the moment what should be said in company, I never practiced myself, nor approved of in another. There is something so ill-bred, so inclining to treachery in this conduct.
I think it necessary to guard my readers against the mistaken notions of Dr. Johnson's character which the former Mrs. Thrale's anecdotes of him suggest. Signora Bozzy will pardon me for saying that I trust more to the accuracy of the reports in my journals than to her memory.
Veneration for his virtue, reverence for his talents, delight in his conversation, and habitual endurance of a yoke my late husband, Henry Thrale, first put upon me, made me go on so long with Dr. Johnson. But the perpetual confinement I will own to have been terrifying in the first years of our friendship, and irksome in the last.
Alas! How different is this from the declarations which I've heard Mrs. Thrale make in Dr. Johnson's lifetime, without a single murmur against any one circumstance which attended their intimacy.
After 20 years of devoted friendship, it is very sad that it should all now have come to this.
How did all this begin? This, the most profound friendship of each of our lives.
At 4 o'clock on the second Thursday of the month of January, 1765, the man whom all London knew as Dictionary Johnson was brought to dinner at our house. The pretext was to meet one James Woodhouse, a shoemaker, who had written some verses.
I did not think much of the poetical shoemaker. They had better furnish the man with good implements for his trade than raise subscriptions for his poems.
As for Johnson and ourselves, we liked each other so well that he remained our constant acquaintance. Mr. Thrale bade me prevail upon Johnson to come with us to our home at Streatham Park, where I undertook the care of his health.
Mrs. Thrale considered that in Henry Thrale, the eminent brewer and Member of Parliament for Southwark, she had taken a husband considerably below herself.
In Mr. Thrale's house I have no place, and no influence, little affection, and no occupation. Allowed no part of his pleasures, I can take no interest in his business. My place, says Mr. Thrale, is either the drawing room or the bedchamber.
Indeed, madam, you live like your husband's kept mistress, safe shut from the world, its pleasures or its cares.
Johnson did not hold with the false notion which prevailed that Mr. Thrale was inferior compared with Mrs. Thrale.
I know no man who is more master of his wife and family than Thrale. If he but holds up a finger, he is obeyed. It is also false to suppose that she surpasses him in literary attainments. He is a regular scholar, but her learning is that of a schoolboy in one of the lower forms.
Mr. Johnson, do you not think these verses of Lope de Vega among the most sublime ever written? So conquers she who is surpassing fair, as lions conquer prey they range to seek. Before her furies that so wildly tear, men stand ashamed to know that they are weak.
These lines are founded upon a trivial conceit, and that conceit ill-explained and ill-expressed besides. That lady, we all know, does not conquer in the same manner as the lion does. 'Tis a mere play of words. And you might as well say that if a man who turnips cry not when his father dies, 'tis a proof that he had rather have a turnip than his father.
Nobody can make compliments or gross speeches as you do. Your compliments, sir, have an elegance unequalled. But when you are angry, who dares make speeches so bitter and so cruel?
Madam, I am always sorry when I make bitter speeches. I never do it except when I am insufferably vexed.
But you suffer things to vex you that nobody else would vex at. I'm sure I've had my share of scolding from you.
It is true you have. But you have borne it like an angel. You're a sweet creature and never angry. You have a temper the most delightful of any woman I know.
Though I am attracted to every variety of greatness in men, I dislike superior intelligence in women. I'm therefore proud that I succeeded in meeting Dr. Johnson fully 2 years before he was seduced by the delights of Streatham Place.
Is this not perfect weather?
Dr. Johnson.
Oh, madam, may I present my
When
very
I
good
first
friend,
met
Mr.
Boswell
Johnson?
in June 1768, I thought him comical and good-natured, but I never liked him. Boswell was attracted to Johnson only because of his celebrity. If Johnson had been in distress, Bozzy would not have cared a pin for him.
Mrs. Thrale was enchanted with Johnson's conversation and had a very allowable vanity in appearing to be honoured with the attention of so celebrated a man.
There are many who admire and respect Mr. Johnson, but you and I love him.
You and I, madam, are rivals for that great man. I hope I may believe you to be a generous rival.
Rivals, indeed. Bozzy cared not what he provoked, so as he saw what such a one would say or do. His humour appeared to me very low indeed. Johnson, I am sure, often felt so too.
Come, sir. Tonight you're not in the most genial humour. Can I not persuade you to draw yourself out a little? Will you not take a little wine?
Sir, I cannot take a little wine, so I will take none at all.
Boswell was himself a man of the most intemperate habits where drink was concerned. I had, on one occasion, to ask Mr. Johnson to rebuke him for coming to my house drunk.
The gift of wine is surely the gift of the gods themselves. You are mistaken to deprive yourself of a convivial indulgence which is everywhere recognized as conferring numerous benefits.
I know no good it does.
Yes, sir, it makes a man eloquent.
Sir, it makes him noisy and absurd.
And this you must allow, it makes a man speak truth.
I see no good there is in that neither, unless he be a liar when he is sober.
This was the mere petulance of the moment, but it was not always his opinion. Dr. Johnson, what do you regard as the greatest pleasure in life?
Fucking. And the second is drinking. And therefore I wonder why there are not more drunkards. For all can drink, though all cannot fuck.
Mr. Johnson's pleasures, except those of conversation, are all coarse ones.
It must be owned that Johnson was not a temperate man either in eating or drinking. He could refrain, but he could not use moderately.
Admirable at giving counsel, no man saw his way so clearly as Dr. Johnson. But he would not stir a finger for the assistance of those to whom he was willing enough to give advice.
Can Mrs. Thrale forget the election advertisements which Johnson wrote for her husband? The trifling verses for her amusement? His entering into her children's minute concerns? All which show him in the most amiable light.
He laughed at the stresses of sentiment. Lady Tavistock has died for grief at the loss of her husband. Oh, how I pity her.
So do not I. She was rich and wanting employment. Putting her into a small shop and giving her a nurse child to tend would have saved her life now. Busy people are never strongly affected by grief.
Your unfeeling principle is that all is done to fill up the time. Surely you will grant that friendship at least is disinterested. See how greatly our neighbour Smith loves his friend Jones.
He has nothing else to do. Make him Prime Minister and see how long his friend will be remembered.
Mrs. Thrale yet again chooses to present the man she professes to revere in an unfavourable light. Of friendship, indeed, he had the highest regard.
A man, sir, should keep his friendships in constant repair. We should cling to those who cling to us.
Johnson's habits of living made him an undesirable intimate. I can still remember my misery, being great with child, in sitting up with him sometimes till 4 o'clock in the morning, till my legs began to swell as big as columns.
Nothing is more terrifying to me than the idea of retiring to bed. I never call it going to rest. I lie down that my acquaintance may sleep, but I lie down to endure oppressive misery, and soon wake again to pass the night in anxiety and pain.
In this pathetic manner, he used to shock me from quitting his company, till I hurt my own health by sitting up with him, when I was myself far from well.
No one forbears their own gratification for the sake of pleasing another. If you do sit up, it is probably to amuse yourself.
You have more tenderness for poverty than any other man I ever knew, and less for other calamities. How can you bear to be surrounded by such necessitous and undeserving people as the people you have about you in your house?
If I did not assist them, no one else would, and they must be lost for want.
You are forever sighing for the tea and bread and butter of life, when satiated with the turtle and burgundy of it. You know, this summer has been particularly hot and dry. As we were driving through the country this morning, I so much wished it would rain, to lay the dust on the roads.
I cannot bear when I know how many poor families will perish next winter for want of that bread which the present drought will deny them, to hear ladies sighing for rain, only that their complexions may not suffer from the heat or their clothes be incommoded by the dust. For shame! Leave off such foppish lamentations and study to relieve those whose distresses are real.
These notions seem to me the feculencies of his low birth. No varnish, however strong, can totally cover primeval meanness.
Dr. Johnson's esteem of what we call coarse life was indeed prodigious, and he did not like that the upper ranks should be dignified with the name of the world.
Yet with all his haughty contempt of gentility, no praise was more welcome to Dr. Johnson than that which said he had the notions or manners of a gentleman.
One evening, my witty friend Lord Eglinton regretted that Johnson had not lived more in polished society. No, no, my lord, said Signor Peretti. Do with him what you would, he would always have been a bear. True, answered the Earl with a smile, but he would have been a dancing bear. Goldsmith thereupon insisted that Johnson, to be sure, has a roughness in his manner, but no man alive has a more tender heart. He has nothing of the bear but his skin.
For dumb animals, Johnson had great tenderness.
I shall never forget the indulgence with which Johnson treated his cat Hodge, for whom himself used to go out and buy oysters, lest the servants, having that trouble, should take a dislike to that poor creature.
I once chid my wife for beating her cat before the maid. For that kind of people, said I, always take advantage of such part of your behavior as makes for them. Susan will now treat puss with cruelty, perhaps, and plead at last her mistress's example.
Though his intimacy in Thrale's family did Dr. Johnson much good, I could wish he had been independent of it. He would have had more dignity.
Dear mistress, while I remain in London, my nights are grown again very uneasy and troublesome. I know not that the country will mend them, but I hope your company will mend my days. I shall see you and hear you every now and then, and to see and hear you is always to hear wit and to see virtue.
September 18, 1774. Dear Mr. Johnson, I am glad Mr. Boswell is with you. Nothing that you say for this week at least will be lost to posterity.
While we were in London together, I won a bet by asking Johnson about one of his particularities. He frequently put into his pocket the oranges from which he first squeezed the juice into his drink. We could not divine what he did with them, and this was the bold question to be put. Oh, sir, I now partly see what you do with your squeezed oranges. There before you are the spoils of last night, some fresh peels, neatly scraped and cut into pieces.
I have a great love for them.
And pray, sir, what do you do with them?
Let them dry, sir.
And what next?
Nay, sir, you shall know their fate no further.
Then the world must be left in the dark. It must be said, he scraped them and let them dry, but what he did with them next, he never could be prevailed upon to tell.
Nay, sir, you should say it more emphatically. He could not be prevailed upon, even by his dearest friends, to tell. Dear Bozzy, you make yourself agreeable wherever you go. Whoever has seen you once wishes to see you again.
That is a very pleasing circumstance, sir.
Yes, sir, very pleasing indeed. I think you are one of the happiest fellows I know.
I think I should be very happy always if I did not drink wine.
Well, you must not drink wine, and you shall not drink wine. Mrs. Thrale sneered when I talked of my having asked you and your lady to live at my house. I was obliged to tell her you'd have as much respect in my house as in hers. The insolence of wealth will creep out.
She is a good woman, but she is a little both of the insolence of wealth and of the conceit of parts.
The insolence of wealth is a wretched thing, but the conceit of parts has some foundation. To be sure it should not be, but who is without it?
Why, you yourself, sir.
Why, I play no tricks, I lay no traps.
No, sir. You are 6 foot high, and you only do not stoop.
Good God!
What letter is that, sir?
One of the most dreadful things that has happened in my time. Mr. Thrale has lost his only son. This is a total extinction to their family.
My dear eldest son, 10 years of age. I thought him reared, but I was too proud of him, provoked God's judgment by my folly. Let this sorrow expiate all my offences, good Lord, and suffer me no more to follow my offspring to the grave.
I own, sir, I have not so much feeling for the distresses of others as some people pretend to have. It will doubtless be very distressing to Thrale, but Mrs. Thrale will soon forget it, as she has so many things to think of.
No, sir. Thrale will forget it first. She has many things that she may think of. He has many things that he must think of.
I have brought another daughter into the world named Cecilia Margaret. Johnson has always been kind to all my children, particularly the eldest, Hester Maria, whom he calls Queenie. He was extremely indulgent to children, not because he loved them, for he loved them not, but because he feared extremely to disoblige them.
A child is capable of resentment much earlier than is commonly supposed. I never could endure my father's caresses, after he had once rendered them displeasing to me by mingling them with caresses I did not care to comply with.
Mr. Johnson caught me one time reprimanding the daughter of my housekeeper for having sat down unpermitted in her mother's presence.
Why? She gets her living, does she not, without her mother's help? Let the wench alone. Poor people's children, dear lady, never respect them. I did not respect my own mother, though I loved her. And one day, when in anger she called me a puppy, I asked her if she knew what they called a puppy's mother.
Oh. If you had had children, would you have taught them anything?
I would have lived on bread and water that they might learn. But I would not have had them about me. Boarding schools are made to relieve parents from that anxiety which only torments them.
As Johnson was always on the side of the children against the old folks, so he was always on the side of the husband against the wife. Lord Abergavenny turned his lady, a woman of birth, out of doors after 14 years' cohabitation, and took in the nursery maid, who was set at the head of the table.
Why, I doubt not, but it was the lady's fault. Women often give great offense by their spirit of non-compliance. A wife should study to reclaim her husband by more attention to please him.
Once, I endeavoured to apologise for a lady who had been divorced from her husband by an Act of Parliament. Her husband behaved brutally to her, and the other gentleman gained her heart while she was thus unhappily situated. Surely, sir, these circumstances may be said to palliate her action.
My dear sir, never accustom your mind to mingle virtue and vice. The woman's a whore, and there's an end on.
But is it not hard indeed that one deviation from chastity should absolutely ruin a young woman?
Why, no, sir. It is the great principle she is taught. Upon the chastity of women, all the property of the world depends. I have much more reverence for a common prostitute than for a woman who conceals her guilt.
Sir, I have been reading a most odd French author who maintains that love is a sickness of the body and can be cured with the help of medicine. Pray, what is your opinion?
No person, madam, ever yet treated the passion of love with contempt, except from stupidity or disappointment.
But you yourself, sir, have argued that gallantry has filled the world with the bulky follies of romantic novels. Surely these novels are so ridiculous because they treat of love?
It is not because they treat, as you call it, of love, but because they treat of nothing that they are despicable. We must not ridicule a passion which he who never felt never was happy, and he who laughs at never deserves to feel.
I wonder you bear with my nonsense.
No, madam, you never talk nonsense. You have as much sense and more wit than any woman I know. And yet, I have known all the wits, from Mrs. Montague down to Bet Flint.
Bet Flint? Pray, who was she?
No, a fine character, madam. She was generally slut and drunkard, and occasionally whore and thief. She wrote her own life in verse, which she brought to me, wishing that I would furnish her with a preface to it. When Bet was obliged to go to jail, she ordered a sedan chair and bid her footboy walk before her. I love Bet Flint.
Is it not absurd to talk of whores and love in the same breath?
Gently, madam, gently. In my youth, I would often speak with low women of the street to hear them relate their history. One, when I asked her what she thought she was made for, touchingly replied that she supposed to please the gentleman. It was a reply that I have long remembered.
I see nothing particular in that, sir. Is that not what all women are made for? Mary Astle tells us that she who marries has nothing else to do but to please and obey her husband. In this eminent exercise of self-denial lies the chiefest happiness of our lives, forsooth. Pray, what was the happiest period of your past life?
That was the year in which I spent one whole evening with Molly Aston. That indeed was not happiness, it was rapture. But the thought of it sweetened a whole year. Many thought Molly Aston had too sharp a tongue and too caustic a wit, but to me she could do no wrong. I've never liked vapid women with no opinions of their own. They have softness, I agree, but well, so have pillows.
What thought Mrs. Johnson of Molly?
Poor dear Tetty was jealous, to be sure, and teased me sometimes when I would let her. And one day, as a fortune-telling gypsy woman passed us when we were walking out in company with 2 or 3 friends in the country, she made the wench look at my hand, but she soon repented her curiosity. For, says the gypsy, your heart is divided, sir, between a Betty and a Molly. Betty loves you best, but you take most delight in Molly's company. When I turned about to laugh, I saw my wife was crying. Pretty charmer. She had no reason.
Did you dispute with your wife in your later years?
Oh, yes, perpetually, my dear. She was extremely neat in her disposition and always fretful that I made the house so dirty. A clean floor is so comfortable, Tetty would say by way of twitting. Till at last I told her I thought we'd had talk enough about the floor. We'd now have a touch at the ceiling. And then, of course, poor Tetty could not cook. I love my dinner extremely. And where the dinner is ill-gotten, the family is somehow grossly wrong.
It need not be solely because of the dinner, dear sir. We keep the finest table possible at Streatham Park. But since Mr. Thrale insists that his wife is not to stink of the kitchen, I never know what is for dinner till I see it. Did you huff your wife about your meat?
Yes, yes. But then she huffed me worse. For she said one day as I was going to say grace, nay, hold, says she, and do not make a farce of thanking God for a dinner which you will presently protest not eatable. Tetty was a lady of great sensibility and worth, shrewd and cultivated. She taught me at last that all quarrels ought to be avoided studiously, particularly conjugal ones. This is a lesson which you have always understood. You are the first woman in the world. Could you but restrain that wicked tongue of yours? You would be the only woman. Could you but command that little whirligig?
How many times did this great, this formidable Dr. Johnson kiss my hand? Aye, and my foot too upon his knees. Nobody loves me as Dr. Johnson does at last. But then nobody has as much soul to love one with.
Thing to do. There is indeed nothing that so much seduces from vigilance as the thought of passing life with an amiable woman. Even though love and marriage are different states. If all would happen that love fancies, I know not what other terrestrial happiness would deserve pursuit.
After Johnson had removed to Bolt Court, he spent most of his time with the Thrales at Streatham. I felt a foolish regret that he had left his old address, but it was not foolish to be affected with some tenderness for a place in which I'd seen him a great deal, from whence I had often issued a better and happier man than when I went in.
Johnson and I have been uncomfortably parted this year, yet our mutual regard does not decay. How should it? He has fastened many of his own notions so on my mind that I'm not sure whether they grew there originally or no. Of this I am sure. They are the best and wisest notions I possess, and I love the author of them with a firm affection.
An evening party was arranged by Dr. Burney for bringing to his house Dr. Johnson and Mrs. Thrale at the desire of the aristocratic Mr. and Mrs. Fulk Grable and their daughter Mrs. Crewe, who wished to make acquaintance with those celebrated personages. But Dr. Burney's calling for an aria from the Italian visitor Signor Piozzi produced general discomfiture. Mr. Grable assumed his most supercilious air of distant superiority and planted himself immovable upon the hearth as if a stranger to the whole set. Dr. Johnson, not being summoned to hold forth, remained silent.
Though not without difficulty, I constrained myself to be passive. However, provoked by the dullness, I stole on tiptoe behind Signor Piozzi and began imitating him.
This grotesque exhibition was not perceived by Dr. Johnson, who faced the fire. But Dr. Burney, shocked lest the Signor should be hurt by the mimicry, whispered an admonition to Mrs. Thrale, who quietly sat down. Most ironic was this opening intercourse between Mistress and Piozzi, considering that this burlesque scene was to be but the first of numerous in real life.
January the 10th, 1779. Mr. Thrale is fallen seriously in love with Sophie Streatfield. She's very pretty, soft and insinuating, squeezes his hand slyly, and with her sweet eyes full of tears looks so fondly in his face, and all for love of me, as she pretends, that I can hardly sometimes help laughing in her face.
It was, of course, very well known in London society that Mr. Thrale was peculiarly susceptible to the charms offered at the court of Cupid.
Mr. Thrale was suddenly struck with the palsy as he sat at dinner with his sister Nesbit last Tuesday, June the 8th, 1779. Poor dear master. This day have we been married 16 years and 8 months. Johnson has such an aversion to the liberties taken by sick people with their surrounding friends that it has greatly blunted his compassion.
As soon as a man fancies himself sick and proposes retirement, every friend helps fetch a pillow and runs to tuck the good gentleman in. Never take to your room while you can be in company. Never take to your bed while you can sit up.
Nobody ever had spirit enough to tell Thrale that his fits were apoplectic. Such is the blessing of being rich, that nobody dares to speak out.
Bath, July the 14th, 1780. I have resumed an agreeable acquaintance here, Signor Piozzi, whom I first saw at Dr. Burney's some 2 years ago. I accosted him in Italian and asked if he would like to give my eldest daughter a lesson or two. He protested that to oblige me he would do anything. He's amazingly like my father. Yes, he shall teach Queenie.
Miss Thrale's modest accomplishments in music were admirably matched by those of her new singing teacher. With a voice too light for musical performances more demanding than that of the salon, and manners too self-effacing for any company other than that of the soiree, he is nevertheless consumed with envy at the vastly superior gifts of his countryman Pacchierotti, whose voice is exquisite, though he is a eunuch. Whether this is the common lot of all Italian singers, Signor Piozzi has yet to demonstrate.
Piozzi has become a prodigious favourite with me. He's so intelligent, so discerning. One can't help wishing for his good opinion. His singing surpasses everybody's for tenderness. And his hand on the forte piano is so delicate. Every tone goes to one's heart, I think, and fills one's mind with emotions one would not be without, though inconvenient enough sometimes. Sunday, September the 17th, 1780. It is this day given to me by God to see my firstborn offspring, my dear Queenie, 16 years old. Mr. Johnson's birthday is next to hers, and we keep them together and fill the summer house with food and fiddles. Sure, nothing will ever happen that will keep me from rejoicing on the birthdays of my daughter and my friend.
I can now look back upon 70 years in which little has been done and little has been enjoyed. A life spent part in penury and part under the violence of pain, in gloomy discontent or importunate distress. I am praying that I may live better in the time to come. Dear Queenie's day is next. I hope she, at 70, will have less to regret.
Mr. Thrale talks now of going to Italy again. How shall we drag him thither? A man who cannot keep awake 4 hours at a stroke, who can scarce retain his feces. And who will go with us on this expedition? Mr. Johnson. He will be invigorated by the addition of new ideas. If Mr. Thrale dies on the road, Johnson will console himself by learning how it is to travel with a corpse.
In March, I found that Mr. Thrale was now very ill and had removed, I suppose by the solicitation of Mrs. Thrale, to a house in Grosvenor Square. It is, naturally, a much more fashionable address, for Dr. Johnson has often told me of Mrs. Thrale's despicable dread of living in Southwark.
Continually having to return to Southwark when Parliament is in session means that I must be shut up in this odious dungeon right next door to the brewery, in a place named with such bitter aptitude, Dead Man's Place, where nobody will come near me. The children are to be sick for want of air, and I am never to see a face but Dr. Johnson's. Oh, what a life that is, and how truly do I abhor it.
When I called at their new abode in London, I was very sorry to see Mr. Thrale so changed in his appearance.
On Tuesday, when I came home to dress, Piozzi excused himself from the great party Mr. Thrale had planned on the following evening. I burst out crying and said I was sure Mr. Thrale would die before it was given. The tender-hearted Italian bid me not despair so, and with a good deal of expression in his manner, sang to me. I suppose you know, says Mrs. Byron, who saw and heard him, that that man is in love with you. I am, replied I, too miserable to care who is in love with me. No danger of all these distresses, it seems. Mr. Thrale died on April the 4th, 1781.
At about 5 on Wednesday morning, he expired. I felt almost the last flutter of his pulse, and looked for the last time upon the face that for 15 years had never been turned on me but with respect or benignity.
The death of Mr. Thrale made a very material alteration to Johnson's reception in that family. The manly authority of the husband no longer curbed the lively exuberance of the lady.
Sir, she has done everything wrong since Thrale's bridle was off her neck.
It was now the expectation of many that Thrale's relict would unite herself to Johnson, and I amused many of our mutual acquaintance with the composition of an epithalamium on the coming nuptials. My dearest darling, view your slave. Behold him as your very scrub, ready to write his author grave, or govern well the brewing tub. Ere my finger touch the lyre, in satire's fierce and pleasure's gay, shall not my Thralia now inspire? Shall Sam refuse the sportive lay? From thee, my mistress, I obtain a manumission, power of lonely gloom, of fretful pain, transported to the blissful bower. Not only are our limbs entwined, and lip in rapture glued to lip, locked in the embraces of the mind, fancy's enchanting sweets we sip.
February the 1st, 1782. Here is Mr. Johnson, very ill indeed. What shall we do for him? If I lose him, I am more than undone. Friend, father, confidant. God give me health and patience. What shall I do?
My little habitation is now a melancholy place, clouded with the gloom of disease and death. My dear old friend Levitt died suddenly in his bed. How much soever I valued him, I now wish I had valued him more.
On Friday, March the 21st, 1783, I was glad to find Dr. Johnson at Mrs. Thrale's house in Argyle Street. He looked pale and was distressed with the difficulty of breathing, but he repeated to me some of his verses on Mr. Levitt with an emotion that gave them full effect.
Death broke at once the vital chain and freed his soul the nearest way. You must be with me as much as you can. You have done me good. You cannot think how much better I am since you came in.
Johnson continued to show a kind attention to Thrale's widow and children as long as it was acceptable. Then, suddenly, on August the 22nd, 1782, Mrs. Thrale decided to go to Italy without Johnson.
Dear Mr. Johnson, after having long intended to go to Italy for pleasure, we are now settling on going thither for convenience. I must go abroad and save money. It is unfortunately impossible, under the present circumstances, therefore, to invite you to accompany us.
Yes, my dear. I regard this as a wise and well-considered course. You should put it into the earliest possible execution.
See the importance of a person to himself. I fancied Mr. Johnson could not have existed without me, forsooth, as we have now lived together above 18 years. Not a bit on it. He feels nothing in parting with me, nothing in the least, but thinks it a prudent scheme and goes to his book as usual. Since he is glad to get rid of me, I'm sure I have good cause to desire the getting rid of him.
On Sunday, I went to church at Streatham and bade farewell to the church with a kiss. My breath was so short that I rested several times in going. Almighty God, Father of all mercy, help me by thy grace, that I may, with humble and sincere thankfulness, remember the comforts and conveniences which I have enjoyed at this place of Streatham, and that I may resign them with holy submission, equally trusting in thy protection when thou givest and when thou takest away.
Piozzi behaves like an angel. He will go with us or follow after us or anything. I must be a monster if I treat that man with ingratitude. But I am the guardian of 5 daughters by Mr. Thrale, and must not disgrace their name and family. I married the first time to please my mother. Must I marry the second time to please my daughter?
As Mrs. Thrale became more and more dissatisfied with her own situation, she slighted Johnson's counsel and avoided his society.
I have been very much out of order since you sent me away. But why should I tell you who do not care nor desire to know? Do not let Mr. Piozzi or anybody else put me quite out of your head. And do not think that anybody will love you like your Samuel Johnson.
Mrs. Thrale took herself off to Bath, where she hoped to escape the insinuations of the London news sheets, which had already begun seriously to link her name with that of Piozzi, a person of whom even his countryman Beretti speaks with deserved contempt.
Since my eldest daughter would force me to an explanation, I called her into my room and fairly told her the strength of my passion for Piozzi and the resolution I had taken to marry him. Queenie said coldly that if I would abandon my children, I must. Susan and Sophie taught the 2 little ones to cry. "Where are you going, Mamma? Will you leave us and die like my poor papa did?" There was no standing that. So I wrote my lover word that my mind was all distraction, and spent the Sunday night in torture.
Gold Court, Fleet Street, June the 19th, 1783. Dear Madam, I am sitting down in no cheerful solitude to write a narrative which would once have affected you with tenderness and sorrow, but which perhaps you will pass over now with a careless glance of frigid indifference. On Monday the 16th, I sat for my picture and walked a considerable way with little difficulty. Thus I went to bed, and in a short time I felt a confusion in my head. Soon after, I perceived that I had suffered a paralytic stroke and that my speech was taken from me. Though God stopped my speech, he left me my hand. How this will be received by you, I know not. I hope you will sympathize with me, but perhaps my mistress, gracious, mild, and good, cries, "Is he dumb? 'Tis time he should." But can this be possible? I hope it cannot. I have loved you with virtuous affection. I have honored you with sincere esteem. Let not all our endearment be forgotten, but let me have, in this great distress, your pity and your prayers. Do not drive me from you, for I have not deserved either neglect or hatred. I am, Madam, your most humble servant, Samuel Johnson.
Soon after this time, Dr. Johnson had the mortification of being informed by Mrs. Thrale that she was actually going to marry the Italian music master.
July the 2nd, 1784. Madam, if I interpret your letter right, you are ignominiously married. If it is yet undone, let us talk once together. If you have abandoned your children and your religion, may God forgive your wickedness. If you have forfeited your fame and your country, may your folly do no further mischief. I,
Bath,
who have
July the
long
4th,
thought you the
1784.
first of humankind,
Sir,
in
I have this morning received from you so rough a letter, in reply to one which was both tenderly and respectfully written, that I am forced to desire the conclusion of a correspondence which I can bear to continue no longer. I write by the coach, the more speedily and effectually to prevent you from coming hither. Farewell, dear sir, and accept my best wishes. You have always commanded my esteem, but until you have changed your opinion of Mr. Piozzi, let us converse no more. God bless you. Paris, September the 13th, 1784. This is Dr. Johnson's 75th birthday. May God give him many and happy returns of it. We used to spend these 2 days in mirth and gaiety at Streatham. But pride and prejudice hindered my longer residence in a place which indeed had lost its charms for me. I am happier at this moment on honeymoon with my dear Piozzi than I have been these 22 years.
No event since the death of his wife so deeply affected Dr. Johnson as the very unaccountable marriage of Mrs. Thrale. Till the hour of his death, he could not wholly dismiss her from his thoughts. Yet he persisted in insisting that he could.
I drive her quite from my mind. If I meet with one of her letters, I burn it instantly. I never speak of her. I desire never to hear of her more.
He had now a great desire to go to Oxford, the university he had so loved and left without a degree fully 55 years before. I promised to accompany him, and we were received with the most polite hospitality by his old friend Dr. Adams, master of Pembroke College. There, Johnson dwelt at unusual length on his dread of death.
I am afraid I may be one of those who shall be damned.
What do you mean by damned?
Sent to hell, sir, and punished everlastingly.
You seem, sir, to forget the merits of our Redeemer.
Sir, I do not forget the merits of my Redeemer. But my Redeemer has said that he will set some on his right hand and some on his left. And no more. Let me alone. Let me alone. I am overpowered.
After our return to London on Wednesday, June the 30th, 1784, we dined alone with Sir Joshua Reynolds. Afterwards, I accompanied him in Sir Joshua's coach to the entry of Bolt Court.
Well, sir, will you not go with me into my house?
No, sir, I must decline. I have an apprehension that my spirits will sink.
Then let us bid each other adieu here, my dear Bozzy. I think of you now as much as formerly, always with the warmest affection. Fare you well.
He left me, and without looking back, sprung away with a kind of pathetic briskness, which impressed me with a foreboding of our long, long separation.
Happiness is not found in self-contemplation. It is perceived only when it is reflected from another. Now, when I arise, my breakfast is solitary. The black dog of depression waits to share it, and from breakfast to dinner, he continues barking. After dinner, what remains but to count the clock and to hope for that sleep which I can scarce expect.
Death had always been to him an object of terror, so that by no means happy, he clung to life with an eagerness at which many have wondered.
I will be conquered. I will not capitulate.
On Monday, December the 13th, 1784, a Miss Morris begged to be permitted to see Dr. Johnson, that she might earnestly request him to give her his blessing. His black servant, Francis Barber, went into his room, followed by the young lady, and delivered the message.
God bless you, my dear.
These were the last words he spoke. His difficulty of breathing increased until about 7 o'clock in the evening, when Mr. Barber and Mrs. Desmullins, who were sitting in the room, observing that the noise he made in breathing had ceased, went to the bed and found he was dead.
Here I am with my husband and his friends, in the bosom of friendship, love, and good humor. We have had a dinner and a concert, and I am fed with flattery almost to repletion. So passes the happiest birthday ever yet experienced by Hester Lynch Piozzi.
On May the 20th, 1785, I made an appearance at court, and His Majesty honoured me with a brief conversation on my Johnsonian labours. He was pleased to observe that I knew Johnson more intimately than any man, to which I replied that the late doctor had been very good to me. Informed that my life of Johnson was by no means yet complete, His Majesty observed that there would be many foolish lives of Johnson before me. Do you make the best, he urged me. I cannot presume to say that I can do that, sire, but I shall do as well as I can. I may now flatter myself that, in the end, I have obeyed my sovereign's command.
I have been now laughing and crying by turns for 2 days over Boswell's book. That poor man should have a good broth and be put to bed. He's quite light-headed. Yet madmen, drunkards, and fools tell the truth, they say. And if Johnson was to me the back friend he has represented, let it cure me of ever making friendships more with any human being. Let it cure me. Surely we shall meet no more, except on that great day when each is to answer to other and before other. After that, I hope to keep better company than any of them.